go a little slow. Catherine will be
Yeah.
Or I could go in backwards order.
We mix it up every time anyway, don't we? Oh,
Just so you know that I don't know if it's because of other microphones being on or not, but there is a quality of being cut out a little bit, audio wise.
got it. Let us know if it continues to be a problem.
Yeah, my audio is off and I'm the only other electronic in the room. Do you think I want to make sure that smartphone thing is off?
Okay. There's kind of like a, I don't know if anyone else can hear it, but to me it also kind of feels like there's it's not an echo, but almost like a something. The quality isn't what it normally is, in other words.
It's fine here. You're coming through great.
Councilor Lowe, how does it sound to you?
Fine to me. I don't have an issue.
Chris, sound okay to you?
All right, I'm gonna start
I
recording.
am here in the middle of just cutting off, but I think once the meeting's going and we're talking one at a time, it should be okay.
Okay, that was my guess. Thank you. Well, thank you all for being here for our work session for July 25th of 2022. Tonight, in our work session, we'll be discussing the downtown revitalization plan, talking about section 6.8 strategy 4 and a downtown parking study. But first, we're going to get started with a roll call.
Jessica Andrade,
Present.
Catherine Disco. Here. Ruth Causey. Here. David Lowe.
Here,
Teresa Nielsen.
Here.
Josh Jones.
Present. And my understanding is that Councilor Lehman is going to be excused for the work session, but he's planning to be here for the city council meeting. So with that, we had a brief conversation about this topic, or not brief, but we had a conversation about this topic during our last work session. But I don't think that the councilors felt like they were really prepared to have a conversation. Hopefully we've had more time to read through the packet and kind of gather our thoughts regarding the various 4 strategic actions around the idea of community gathering spaces. Chris, do you want to kick off the discussion?
I'd be happy to, sure. No, I appreciate that. I guess premise, and maybe I didn't premise this well at the last work session, but there's a lot in here that we will be working on and dealing with. The reason, again, for wanting to jump right in and talk about section 6.8 strategy number 4 for parks and amenities is specific to the city-owned lot at 14th and Main, where we need to make some decisions sooner than later in order to move forward with the cleanup and future development of that property. So that's really the only catalyst and reason why we're skipping, all of the other things that are in this document and going right to this parks and amenities strategy, which again, even numerically is strategy number 4. It's not even the highest ranked strategies to focus on, but that's where we're at. Ruth informs me that there's a survey that she was able to put together that's on the city's website at this time to get some community input on this topic. Thought we could focus tonight's work session in at least in part to looking at the 4 different strategies or recommendations, strategic actions or recommendations that came from Stantec, and just list out some pros and cons, with the hope being that we could take the survey from the community and the city council's pros and cons and come up with a staff recommendation for you at a future meeting. Depending on how the pros and cons go, we may I may give some direction to Ruth to maybe tweak the survey a little bit, maybe provide a little bit more pro and con information in that survey. But honestly, I've not pulled that survey up yet. I was just informed today it was online, so I haven't had a chance to look at it yet. So a little bit of flexibility there depending on how the discussion tonight goes. So with that intro, any questions on to get started? Otherwise, I thought we would just go through them in the order that they're presented and just get a quick kind of list of pros and cons from the council.
Yeah.
Councilor Andrade has a question.
I had a quick question about the survey. is the plan to leave that up for a period of time and then to advertise that in our newsletter and other ways like Facebook, social media?
Correct. Yep.
Council Andrade?
I just wanted to note that the survey, while it is important, it's very basic, very much prioritizing which of the 4 projects that you want to see in what order, and that is it. There isn't anything specific to what kinds of projects you would like to see at each of the sites or any sort of free form response. So just so that people are aware if they didn't see it. So yeah, I definitely think we should add some more clarifying questions and such, but I appreciate the first step.
That's good feedback. Thank you, Counselor. So just listed in order, the first strategic action, it looks at the museum commons. I'm on page 103. I believe that's what I'd put in the agenda. So just looking at page 103, museum commons, the quick on this one is to enhance and transform the open field in front of the museum into a formal commons as a community gathering area and outdoor event space. Design the space to protect and enhance the building's historic character while creating a captivating and safe environment for visitors. Incorporate art and gateway elements. And then if we turn the page, 104, it talks more in depth about museum commons. I won't read through all this. I'll presume everybody had a chance to go through that in preparation for tonight. So first, I guess, any general questions, or do we want to go ahead and start listing some of the pros of having a active space in this area? And I'm going to lean on City Recorder Ruth and Assistant City Manager Chelsea Starner to take good notes for me today, since I'm not at a spot where I can do that myself. So
Sure.
Thank you in advance to them for helping out with this.
And Councilor Kazi?
Do we have any idea of the cost involved of any of these improvements, or any kind of a cost range, or what it would, how we could go about getting something like that?
We can. I think they're so general right now, and there's so many different aspects to each of these that I think really the focus of the pros and cons is going to be less related to cost or expense and more related to different amenities that would be possible there, parking, access, the size, the location, those types of things. And then when we get a little bit more specific, we can start talking about additional amenities, and that's going to have a large influx or an impact on the cost. So it's good to keep in mind as we're going through it, but no, I've not cost any of these, projected kind of conceptual ideas out yet.
In terms of a few pros, and I'm sure there's lots of them that I'm not thinking about in the exact moment, but of the commons, it's a relatively unused space right now, but there are community gathering events that occur on occasion, such as at Christmas time or the holiday season. There also appears to be some interest from the museum in seeing something happen here. It may be that there's additional resources from the museum or from their supporters in funding a project in collaboration with the city potentially.
Yeah, I think at the very least, the museum is very interested in putting a little bit of money into the Philomath location, both the building itself and the grounds. And so they've on their own accord mentioned some improvements to the lawn area, but we've not had any real collaborative meetings on what that might look like. But there's definitely an effort here in the next few years for them to want to take some steps to improve the museum and the grounds.
Right. There's also some parking there, so that's another positive. But, Go ahead.
Well, as I ranked these 4 projects, this was actually my top choice because I feel it's underutilized. Obviously, it would extend the gathering places in the downtown area further to the west. right now, everything is pretty much concentrated at 13th Street. And I think as large a space as it is, it would be, could be used for a variety of activities. And I think we'd probably get a lot for our money if the lawn were improved and tiered as suggested.
Councilor Nariosa?
As an educator in Philomath, there were several museum events that I attended with a classroom full of children in elementary and even in middle school where displays have been set up in the museum or otherwise. I can see that by more effectively utilizing that and making it more welcome and more effective for even after events or before events for youth and people to gather, could be advantageous, not only for our community, but for the schools and the children, and that as well as facilitating things. Maybe other districts would then maybe use that museum a little bit more, ready with having some facilities, maybe some benches or people or something there. I know as an educator that would have been beneficial for me in walking, because we would walk from one place to the next.
Right. Councilor Andrade?
Yeah, I also like the idea that Councilor Causey brought up of just being able to extend that gathering spaces across downtown area. I really like the suggested potential design elements, particularly the historical placards and the terraced areas. I do wonder if it would be beneficial to, like, I am a big proponent of wild spaces or green spaces, even if it is a lawn, which I prefer more natural than just grass. But at the same time, I wonder if it would be better to include more like of a plaza-y type area that is more hard, flat for, because even though we have space for ADA accessibility, if we're having stuff on the lawns, it's going to be very difficult for someone who is in a wheelchair or in using crutches or some other, who has trouble walking in some way, to be able to go to those booths if there's some sort of holiday fair or something like that. So I would like to see some element of that in there as well, not just solely grass.
Yeah. And it does mention in the plan that they mention ADA ramps and plaza area and sidewalks intersecting that area. So.
Yeah, but looking at it, it's not really there. It's just looking at the photo, it's mainly grass and then a walkway in the middle. There isn't like a giant section for people to mill about who can't go on the grass, or it's difficult for them to go on the grass.
Okay. So that'd be one con towards the way it's presented here would be it's got limited hardscaped areas for people to be able to meet up.
Yeah, it would be something to potentially add, and in theory, I would think, I don't know, because I don't know cost stuff, but I would assume upkeep would be a little bit easier to not have complete lawn in all of those areas.
Yeah.
But
any other positives? And maybe we can switch and go to some of the disadvantages of this site. Any other positive things that people liked about either specifically how this was presented, any other ideas here, or any of your own insights into the benefits of this location? Okay, if not, let's talk a couple of disadvantages of the spot.
Actually, Councilor Causey, you want to add it?
Oh, sorry, I didn't see you. Sorry, go ahead, Councilor Causey.
It's not really a disadvantage, but I'm assuming that if we were, let me step back a minute. I'm assuming that ultimately every one of these projects could be done. It's just a matter of priority and time and funding. And I assume if this were the first project we chose to move ahead with, that we could meet with the architects and figure out what elements we want in it, including a plaza area or whatever it might be. So I guess I wouldn't view any design elements at this point as a disadvantage, because I think anything is possible.
Yeah.
Right, I agree. I think it is important to note that one disadvantage may be that the city doesn't own this lot. And so anything that the city has an idea for, we're gonna need to cooperate with the museum on. And we do have, again, I've spoke to this before, I'm not very familiar with what the do's and the don'ts are gonna be with the museum being on the historic registry of historic buildings. Other than what I've been told, which is the buildings on the list, not the landscaping, but you obviously want the landscaping to, be somewhat reflective of the building, right? So we wouldn't want to do, granite tiles and glass backdrops and everything else to something that was much more modern looking and feeling, in contrast to the museum itself. But definitely, I would think landscaping, hardscaping, pavers, concrete, etc. I don't think it's going to be out of line with the historic building itself. So, but again, we'll know a little bit more on that as we go through. Any other kind of negatives on this location? Not so much elements, but the location of this site.
Oh, sorry, Councilor Visco.
I like the idea of these proposals. I'm wondering how developing something on the far, so to your point of location, developing something like this on the far side of where our center of activity really is kind of occurring right now. And anyone that was out on Saturday will know that it was very, very active between Binwood and 13th Street for sure, almost 12th Street. But by the time you got down to this end, there's not much to carry this. So will this encourage that? I would say probably yes, but there aren't really businesses to carry folks down that way either. So in the case of like the sip and stroll this weekend, is this where we would want to prioritize our efforts? Further, I don't see that any of these operate as a silo, and I would want to make sure that if we were looking at developing this, that we carry whatever themes, that we make sure that they fit together like puzzle pieces, not like a bunch of individual, stones within the city of Philomath. So when we look at what is really 3 locations, the Gateway Art Features aren't really a destination, if you will. Just making sure that we're branding Philomath the same way and consistently. So cost also, Councilor Quasi brought up. I think cost is certainly part of this conversation. And I'll just step back just enough to say that I feel almost like we haven't really asked the community still what they want, and this will have direct impacts on a lot of folks, and they might also have opinions on where they would like to see Philomath allocate their funding dollars. So it's going to be taxpayer dollars, having that opportunity for them to have a vote beyond just a survey online, to whatever extent. I still feel like we're missing that piece. When I look at strategic plans for cities and visioning, this is part of that vision for Philomath into the future, and I'd like to see more public participation.
Thank you.
So as far as specifics for this site, what I heard was it's a little bit outside of the current active downtown area, being that it's west of 12th Street. So again, I'm just trying to make a pro con list for this site specifically. That's kind of what I pulled out of those comments. Is that accurate?
That's accurate, but again, I'll just reinforce, I don't think we can look at pros and cons in silos, which is why I shared that other. I think we do need, they kind of are overarching. While we can focus on specific pros and cons, those are pros and cons that should be considered as well, is the whole picture.
Thank you. And Councilor Quasi.
I just wanted to say that I'm very much in favor of public input, but I think in order to get quality input, we have to be prepared to give the public enough information to answer basic questions they might have. The location of each of these areas is obvious, but We need to give them some kind of a vision of what it might look like and some kind of an estimate of cost, even if it were $3 signs versus $1 sign, and maybe advantages or disadvantages with respect to timing. For example, on the 13th Festival Street, obviously making the improvements that are described here would probably be facilitated if they could be done in conjunction with streetscapes. So that's kind of a timing element that is unique to that particular location. So I just want to make sure that I would like to, for example, go to the farmer's market and give people a chance to give their input on this. I think that works pretty effectively. But you have to be armed with enough information so that the first question that comes up, you're not going to be sitting there, well, gosh, I don't know.
Yeah, thank you. Good point. Councilor Nielsen?
Another con I was considered in reading this over was the proximity of that to the fire station. Could there be any conflicting occurrences being with that just right next door to the fire department? Would that be with crowds or with noise, or if there was an emergency? I'm not sure. I'm not saying there is, but it's something to consider in regards to the location of the
Yeah, good thing to talk to the chief about.
Yep.
Councilor Andrade?
To Councilor Causey's point, that's exactly what I was going to ask about, if there were plans to take this to the market. Also, I can't remember if the streetscapes conversation was comprised of planning commissioners and city council members and general members of the public, or if it went to the planning commission at all. But just wondering if we can involve them in some way. This feels like something that is right up their alley as well, considering that we had planning commissioners involved with like the streetscapes and the main street and everything, those plans. And then to Councilor Nielsen's point, I was actually going to bring up, I thought it would, I mean, it's still good to check to make sure that, there isn't any sort of interference with the fire department at all. But I thought that it would potentially be a benefit for them to have, if they have some sort of educational events over there or something. But I honestly don't know, just potential pro.
Okay, should we look at 13th Street, or is there any more conversation on?
Is there,
museum comments?
sorry, are there thoughts though on the planning commissioners and whether they will have separate conversations there if they haven't already?
Councilor Causey, you said.
Well, the planning commissioners were heavily involved in the streetscapes project and took that to the farmers market. So
That was exactly my point.
yeah, certainly they could be more involved in this as well. We have reviewed this document with the planning commissioners, but only as a piece of an FYI.
Yeah, clearly there's a lot of conversation that would need to occur for all these projects. But I do think it's good just to have these conversations so we can frame our ideas as a whole, as a council about it.
Oh, definitely. It's just, but are there plans to have those conversations with them though? That's kind of the main question that I have regarding that.
I wasn't planning to. I was hoping that the city council would take the lead on this, but if not, then we can put a pin in it for now, and we can go to the planning commission with this and bring it back to you with their recommendation.
I mean, we can still take the lead on it and still have them also go over it, like we have with other projects. So.
Sure.
Yeah, I think it'd be good to have these conversations at the council level, and then we can talk about how we would like to engage the public more generally afterwards. I think that's entirely appropriate. So should we talk about 13th Street? Chris, did you want to frame that up, or did you just want us to kind of jump into the pros on 13th Street?
Yeah, let's just jump right into some of the pros and the advantages of North 13th as a festival street.
Anyone have any first thoughts? Councilor Causey?
Well, this was actually, depending on the timing issue I described earlier, this was actually my second or third choice. And my primary argument against these improvements is that it functions pretty effectively doing what is described without any improvements at all. It could certainly be a more attractive space. And if the improvements could be done in conjunction with streetscapes, I would really need to know the cost of those improvements before we could make a final decision, I think.
Yeah. Some of the pros is that it's being used in this way already. So clearly the community is sees its value as a place to gather. If not the community generally, certainly some of the local business owners. And so it functions, as Councilor Causey said, pretty well right now. I do think that it could be more attractive. It could be a spot, a place. If it was more attractive, I could see that even more people would want to come and spend time there. Yeah, and the timing issue, I think, it just makes sense to make the lighting similar while we're doing the streetscape project and make the overall appearance of it align with our downtown design manual and our vision with that for the streetscapes project. So yeah, I don't see a lot of downsides to it other than the potential for costs. And yeah, we have I don't know that all the business owners are in favor of having more community gathering space or more community gatherings there, but I think that the majority of them are. But yeah.
Which ones have you talked to when you say you think the majority of them? Curious. I've heard differing opinions.
Yeah, I've heard very favorable things from Pioneer, Dirt Road, Dizzy Hen, Sissies, and but Spaeth wasn't super excited about it when I talked to them. And Citizens Bank, they liked the idea of it, but they had concerns about people leaving lots of trash on their property. But I think that they've also been pleasantly surprised that has not been an issue for them at all.
You know what?
It's okay.
It kind of surprises me that Spaeth is less enthusiastic because they're the only business which has an entrance off of 13th. So they could certainly channel their customers.
I think it was parking was the challenge they were experiencing, accessibility, so folks couldn't get into Low Bumber and things of that nature.
Well, maybe some parking could be reserved for them as it is currently in the front.
I mean, honestly, part of it, I think, is just vision. They're used to things being done a certain way. They have parking in the back and a loading area in the back.
Mhm.
I think it's just for them, they're not getting nearly as much business as Dirt Road is during this kind of thing. So, but I also know that they got a lot of walk-in traffic, at least from the event that I was there, and sold things. But it may just be personality types, and maybe they don't like this gatherings as much. Some people just don't like being around people. I mean, who knows?
So we talked to them, and their concern was it impacted their business.
Yeah, I talked to them too.
Right. Well, so I don't think it's a personality thing. I think it's a business thing. When we look at their loading dock in the back, that's not enough to really pull a vehicle into. Like you can back into it, but with the parking the way it was during those events, that parking was so close that you couldn't get vehicles in there. And parking was running both ways on 13th and then on College as well. So it was pretty tight, and they were having some challenges second time in particular. So I don't think it's personality. I do think it's something we should be cognizant of. It's a Saturday and it's summertime that we're looking at, or late spring, some of the events we've held, and it has impacted their business.
Yep. Yeah, so not all business owners have the same feeling about it.
But if I can interject one thing that I've noticed, we're kind of home repair people, do-it-yourselfers. And I was noticing in conversations I was having that people didn't know that space was there. A lot of people were like, oh, look at that. That it's that awareness of what is there. We, the locals, we all know that's what, you know, where we go with. But if you're new to town, or if you're not, that economy piece of, you know, spurring the economy of the local individuals, I think Spade maybe not have that vision for that visibility that they're now having through that. And we could maybe address the parking. I'm a huge advocate of the Festival Street. I think it's obvious that people, that it's a chance to build community. It's a chance to connect with others, strengthen relationships, build a sense of who we are and what we hope to accomplish as a city. And I think it stimulates tourism. People may come as passing through, may stop, may see, may come for a festival or such. If we have that kind of environment in a street that would be welcoming and look finished and not just set up for one event. There's a big difference between having stationary event things rather than bringing things in and hoping things are going to work. I know in talking to food carts, it was the same thing. Well, is this a festival? No, it's kind of a road we close off and describing it and what it was going to be like. But to have something set and organized and designed as a festival gathering spot would be really different, bringing people in, I would imagine. And then I do think it would promote business economy. People are seeing what's available. People are conversing one with another, talking, seeing what businesses are here, walking around the area. I think it's a plus. I think we, from those I have discussed and from those I've talked to, and business owners as well, and individuals I know, I think it's the vast majority are positive. And I don't know if we can do anything in life with 100% approval.
Yeah.
I think that's just not realistic in real life, saying that we have to have 100% approval. So.
And then I'll just add that this idea, I mean, it's been called a festival street. I don't think necessarily that these improvements would only benefit it for times where people gather, but just generally, like if we put a bunch of trees in there and we had a nice walkable street, like people are going to walk it regardless of whether or not it's a festival street. It's just going to be a nice place to be, such as what we find in all the places that we've mentioned, Independent, Sisters, Camas, Ashland. It's just a nice place to gather, whether or not you're having a festival. So, Councilor Andrade?
So yes, we will never have 100% all in on a project, but I think it is extremely premature to say that most people are in favor of this project or of this project in this manner, when we haven't had specific surveys, formal surveys or interviews or anything like invitations to the business owners, to the people who live on and around those that set of streets. And to Councilor Bisco's point, last time we had this conversation, that there are people who live in the area who are concerned about noise and traffic and safety. I do not feel comfortable prioritizing this project, however cool it is. Like, I don't feel comfortable prioritizing it until we have formalized surveys or interviews, a meeting with the primary people who will be impacted by this project, this proposed project, and unless we get the okay from the majority of them, in addition to the public at large. And I think that's the biggest con, is that we really don't know how in favor people are who are being directly affected by this.
And that would be true for every one of these projects, correct?
Correct, but this one in particular, I think, where you're talking about a street that people use for access to businesses, you're talking about people's livelihoods, you're talking about people's lives, and like how the safety of, the children who live on the street and who live on the children whose houses are on that street.
I did. I just want to go back to all good points here. The idea of building community is a good one. And I think a lot of the community supports that. I think we're still missing a piece of this conversation, which is the property that the city owns on 14th Street.
We'll get there.
Well, actually, I'd like to get there at this moment in my comment, if I
Okay.
could. So what we're talking about in these spaces here does not actually have, in this 6.8 recommendations, we don't actually talk about that piece, but what we're talking about with festivals and spaces where we can have food carts and events and accessibility. Again, I just want to go back to the sip and stroll where it was solid people for a period of time, all the way from 19th all the way through. And we have that big gap of where people could have gathered in that center space. There's no question, we've not really, maybe it's just assumed or implied, but we have not really got any ideas on where we're going to provide restrooms when we have people coming into these communities. Certainly Dizzy Hen shouldn't be the restroom for the community, nor should Dirt Road Brewing. But just bigger gathering spaces, because we don't really have them, and 13th Street isn't big enough on its own. So I'd like to encourage that we are having that city property conversation at the same time we're having this one, because there are similar usages, similar impacts to the community as well.
Thank you.
So specific, just that, again, I just want to summarize, like I'm trying to help Ruth with the notes here. So a negative for 13th Street would be it doesn't have public restrooms on site that are, you know, truly public restrooms. You have the business owners have restrooms, but they're not necessarily, shouldn't be necessarily be relied upon to be public restrooms for festivals, events, that type of thing. So I think that's a good negative to put down. Maybe we add that to the museum commons as well, as there aren't currently public restrooms available outside of the museum restrooms, which again, you know, may or may not be sufficient, but I think that's a good consideration. And we will get to the 14th and Main, but I'm trying to just have some order here. Is there any other positives or negatives on the 13th Street Festive Street?
Councilor Posey?
Just one thought that as well defined as this space is, and the drawings were pretty precise, more precise than the other areas. I would think this is one location that could be costed out relatively accurately.
Thank you. Councilor Lowe, I hear you have your hand up, but I can't see that.
Yeah, I think maybe as a pro, and this is true with two of the sites and not true with the other two, but this one is actually in the business area. The business is right around it, with the museum and with Mary's River Park, which we haven't talked about. They're sort of not, you don't really have the businesses right there. So if you're kind of aiming at sort of a business development angle, looking at supporting those, this one and the other one in the main street look favorable to me.
Thank you.
But that's just if you're doing that.
Sure. Other cons for 13th Street?
Can I ask real quick, Mayor Jones, of the potential design elements listed there, again, I'm thinking of updating and beefing up the survey a little bit. Of the potential design elements that are listed, are there any there that the council wants to just strike out and remove from the get-go? I mean, is there enough information there where there's anything there where you're just opposed to, where you wouldn't want that included in the list of potential design elements in the survey?
Could you clarify what a bollard is?
Bollard's just a metal or concrete post that's attached to the ground. Sometimes they're removable, sometimes they're permanent.
Got it.
So it's intended to keep vehicles from coming into pedestrian areas and vice versa. The intent would be that you wouldn't have a curb to do that, which, you know, curbs, you know, as well as they do, or maybe not as well as they do, are intended to keep cars on the street and pedestrians up on the sidewalk and keep them separated.
The bollards tend to be a little more attractive and can be made more attractive than, say, sawhorses.
Right.
Yeah.
Personally, there's not, I like every design element that's listed here personally. Councilor Kazi?
I don't like the arch with the log over it.
No.
I think that looks sort of silly, but that's my opinion. Since you mentioned the survey, as we were talking about getting input, I wonder if we could, if it would be possible to include a paper survey with our utility billing that people could complete and return.
The newsletter has been designed that way. It's going to be going out with the next utility bill. So it'll give a link to the online survey, and Ruth has made a tearaway that you can return with your utility bill as well. It'll kind of help you prioritize.
On city's homepage, it's got a little drop-down banner that when you go to the homepage, it drops down and says, hey, tell us what you think. Take the survey.
Well, you're gonna bring it.
So what we're talking here is on the digital side of that survey is we'd be asking Ruth to go back in and maybe add in some of these potential design elements. I know we included like a brief, like a 1 or 2 line description of it. But Ruth, just thinking out loud, I think we'll maybe go back in and add some of these design elements. You know, I can talk a little bit, maybe see if we can get like the $1 sign, $2 sign, $3 sign, and just kind of comparison that way on what the cost would be at real basic level. So anyway, we can talk after this and see what we can do to beef up that survey a little bit, and make sure we're giving people a little bit more information to go off of.
I just have one question. Is it advantageous financially to do it in conjunction with the streetscapes, or does it matter financially one way or the other? That's what I would like to know. Will we save money if we do it in conjunction with the streetscapes rather than doing it 3 years later or whatever it may be?
Likely, yes. When you're talking about streetlights, yes. When you're talking about I'm just looking through trees and landscaping. Yeah, because they're going to just order a little bit more and do it at the same time they're doing the rest of the streetscape project. The information kiosk, we've got one of the businesses has volunteered to install that, so I don't think that one would matter. The street lights I talked about already. Ambient lighting, it's not going to cost any more, any less. And then the gateway feature, I would say, yeah, depending on what that's going to be, and we don't have a ton of time, but depending on what that's going to be, it makes sense for them to do that while they're putting the sidewalk and everything else in. If we're talking about big posts or poles or something, we'd want to incorporate that while we're doing the kind of streetscape. You know, already been designed, but we'd be doing a little bit of redesign work to make something work, and at least only having to construct it one time. So some of these things, yes, others not so much.
Could that be clarified for the survey or information for the public as well? Because I think that's important information for them to understand as they make decisions and as they, I would like to know that as a public.
Okay.
Thank you. And Councillor Andrade.
Speaking of the survey, and I was hoping, I'm assuming that there'll be some like free response questions. I think it would be a great idea to have that, at least, of just like, do you have any other ideas for this space? And then like just have that for each of the 4 projects, and that way people can potentially suggest, like, I like the idea, like with Councilor Kazi, like I like the idea of the gateway, but I don't like the suggested like gateway design. What if it looked something like this? And then like later on a refined survey can come out or something like that with additional options once council narrows in on what to focus on for with regards to which project and what elements of each project.
Yeah, I think you ended where I was thinking, which is that's probably better for a future survey when we get to that specific, location, to start talking about, here's the elements we're looking at. What do you like? What don't you like? Are there additional elements? But to me, that's a separate survey, maybe specific to that location. But I agree with you wholeheartedly. I just think trying to do all of that in one survey is probably too much for people to get their head
That
wrapped
is an
around.
excellent point. Thank you.
But good point. Any other cons or pros on 13th? If not, we can move on and start talking about the next the third of the four.
Councilor Bisco?
No.
Okay. So looks like not, and we're right on time. So about halfway through our time as well. So
Yeah.
should we go ahead and move on to the library area?
Yeah, so this is the title of this Marys River Park expansion, I guess expanding to the north, and then City Hall Park. I've kind of layman wise, I've been referring to this as like a civic center park or civic park or something like that. But either way, it gives you the idea. It'd be, that area between the backside of the police department and the library and, to a lesser extent, City Hall, and then and Marys River Park, which really kind of is that property, but really starts the property line itself kind of starts there. I'm looking at page 109. You can kind of see that thin gray property line that's kind of on that southernmost bike path, pedestrian path goes along there. So that's the area. It's the same pattern, I guess. Pros and cons for this area. If any of the specific elements that council members like or don't like that we should or shouldn't include in the survey.
Councilor Andrade?
I have a question. When this was put together, did Stantec also take a look at the documents that were created years ago? I remember Jeff Lamb had talked about there being a community center plan. I think it was the Philomath 2000 group with the potential community center. I think it might have been like rec center / events center, but I could be misremembering that. And whether those elements were incorporated into here. I didn't get to read the document in full, but I did skim some of it at that time.
They
that we
didn't.
last looked at it.
No, I didn't provide them that. I didn't have a lot of that, and a lot of that isn't city-owned material. I think I've got a copy of some of that stuff, but a lot of that stuff you're talking, it's 30, 40 years old at this point. So they weren't given that. What they were given was the updated park master plan, transportation master plan, the downtown Main Street plan that Echo Northwest had just done. Those were the supportive documents they were given.
Okay, just because I want to say they came up in our conversations with Eco Northwest, maybe. I don't remember specifically, and I guess I just thought that we would still be seeing that as a suggestion, because I think what was also talked about, I think in the new park master plan, a rec center was proposed as an option, if I remember correctly. But anyway, I think it would be, based on what I remembered from the Philomath 2000, I liked that idea of having that right behind. I think it was the library. I'd have to find a copy of that again.
I believe it was actually 4 buildings side by side is what the original plan was, but that plan shifted and changed a little bit too. So I'm not exactly sure either, Counselor, but that's a valid point. So as far as amendments go or elements go, you'd like to see conceptually what it would look like to add some type of a community center in this area?
Yeah, I mean, we don't have any indoor recreation centers for adults. As someone who likes to play basketball and prefers to do so inside as opposed to outside, I would like to be able to play basketball in our city. Outside is a bit difficult for someone with major allergies and such. But and I'm sure other people would want to play volleyball or some other kinds of, I don't know, it would just be nice. That could also function as an event center, as kind of proposed as one of the last bullet points.
Thank you. Councilor Bisco?
So I'll share a little bit of that history that Councilor Andrade was talking about. The Philomath 2000 group, just community group, had a lot of They were a lot of the reason why we're sitting in City Hall today. They were part of what was known, and I didn't realize this till recently, so it's just a designation. The Civic Center was in fact what we created, or what they helped build, which was the library, the police department, and City Hall. And that was, at that time, the proposal was Civic Center, as in the things that you do within your city that are civic minded. Part of that plan was in fact the community center that Councilor Andrade is talking about. And the vision for that was, like Chris had mentioned, I think they were looking at all 4 buildings along this same line that we are running here. That community center, which is different than the city civic center, excuse me, was intended to be an event center of sorts, but also an amphitheater that faced the Marys River Park, allowed for outdoor events in certain occasions, and really was kind of, the idea was that that would be a draw for local events for the community within a structure, rather than that outdoor ability to do that right now. So historically, I would love to see if that was acknowledged in this concept planning. It's a very important part of a lot of the history of Philomath, but also some core members of folks that helped get us to where we had a city hall and the library. And there's been a lot of talk about it since, maybe not formally, but folks would definitely hear that an event center would be beneficial. Certainly we see it in smaller communities where it's nice to just have small gathering spaces. I know we use the fire department for that in some capacity. The library's got a small room as well, but something a little bit bigger might be appropriate in this expansion concept. I will share this also because it does have to do with this project. I wasn't looking for this, but was taking pictures of the elm tree that we talked about for the Heritage Tree Program. And that was on Saturday. And here right in front of City Hall was a camper, an RV camper and a truck, and the slide pulled out and the dog wandering around on the yard over here. And we just stopped to make sure they were okay because he'd been taking the pictures and looked down and here they were. Their comment was they would have considered the park, but they didn't. They turned around, actually looked down there, turned around because it wasn't paved. And I don't know that we've ever thought about that or had that conversation. That's not a huge amount of space to pave, but if that's something we could consider in this, it might allow some folks some additional accessibility, as well as the comment that any open parking lot is a good place to park. And so that goes back to that parking conversation that we're having. After we finished talking to them, Dax came and delivered to the police department, which was kind of cool. And we were taking pictures there. And no kidding, this all happened in 15 minutes or less. Another RV and a truck pulled up right across the vacant lot, right across from the library there. And they were on the north side of the street. And they too had just pulled over, needing a place to park. So in all of the conversations we've talked about RV parking, it occurred in these 2 instances to me that perhaps we could identify just some simple signage that RV parking is okay or permitted in some of those Main Street spaces or Applegate spaces. Both were very happy to be here. One was coming from Ashland and heading back inland, but just 2 very real and a really small period of time acknowledgements that RV parking is definitely part of what goes on here. It wasn't even technically the in and out on the weekend, Friday and Sunday. This was Saturday.
Thank you. Councilor Nielsen?
In thinking about, are we still talking about Mary's Park? Okay. I thought about our schools. With a growing school enrollment, that means a growing younger population. It would be nice to have more outdoor areas for that younger population and younger families to gather and to experience the outdoors. I think there is a lot that can be discussed as far as design features for a park. What are we lacking that is not a part of our park system that could be addressed by the Park Advisory Board? If I'm not mistaken, I believe the summer free lunch program still gathers at the library during the summer months. They do have tables at the rear of the library, but having the extended space that families could come and enjoy and participate in that program and have an activity of sort would be a positive thing for me. Also, as Councilor Andrade mentioned, I am very interested in an event center or community center for our town. I think it's time that we address that. And if that becomes part of what this is, I'm definitely in in agreement with that, because I think we have a huge underrepresented population that could use a place, senior citizens, other meetings that are being held in other locations that we could kind of centrify and have a gathering place for them. Also for emergency services, it would be nice to have a building that could be used as an emergency gathering place, signified as just that, maybe with a kitchen for those that need those services.
Thank you.
Could I just point out that the majority of this area is in the flood zone?
Yeah.
So if you start talking emergency services.
Yeah,
You're going
you're going to emergency.
Not really compatible.
So I'll just, and we just in terms of timing, we have about 20 minutes left for this, to close this topic up and to go on to talk about 14th Street. But I'm just going to talk briefly about pros and cons of this area as I see them. It's the natural extension of the existing park, which is really nice. It adds additional paved space, which makes the park more accessible. At least I'm assuming that these could be paved sidewalks rather than trails like in the park. But that's a con. I don't see that there's lighting. And I don't know that we should have lighting, but something worth mentioning. Having access to the back of the police station, I wonder about that. I don't know about security or whatnot, but I think about that. And yeah, people are already gathering at the library. People are gathering at the park. I like the idea in general, and it's got a nice parking area. Councilor Kazi?
I had a timing issue with respect to this as well, because I think the library expansion is not too far in the distant future. And we would certainly, it would seem to make sense to do this in conjunction with that expansion. As far as the park areas around the civic center.
I agree.
And
some of those initial conversations with the library, and again, these are just internal conversations with staff and just kind of preliminary looks on what we should be looking at and what we should be considering. But a lot of this is not going further south into further into the floodplain, but maybe an expansion to the west towards the police department. They've got that kind of back access, side access, but other than that space is pretty underutilized. So that was the initial look we were going to start having the consultants taking a look at, as an expansion to the west towards the PD, not necessarily to the south. And Ruth's right to point out with the floodplain there, this is primarily going to be an outdoor use area. I don't know we'd be looking at a big community center in this location just because of those constraints.
Thank you. Other cons that people would like to talk about? Pros? Chris's daughter. Chris, did you want to summarize what you're hearing here before we talk about 14th Street?
I think I've heard, well, hopefully Ruth has captured what needs to be captured there on, location wise. I think some of the pros and cons on this one hold true with the museum commons. It's not right in the commercial core area. It is alongside the highway. There's already some existing parking there. So, there's a number of those. Trails and paths would be paved, some trees, landscaping, playground, and then the event center area. Some of the conversations with the library have been, how do we expand the library that could include event center type space? I don't know, it would be a basketball court, Councilor Andrade, but definitely something that's more of a community usable space that the library could use for their large events. The community could also utilize, and maybe we'll throw a basketball hoop on one of the walls or something. Anyway.
And Chris, how much time are you going to want it for the parking study discussion?
About 5 minutes.
Okay. Let's talk about the city-owned property of 14th and Main.
Okay.
And just for comment, it's on page 93. If that helps. So again, we're going to go just kind of chat about some of the pros and cons of this area. And this one is a little bit, it seems like it's a little bit more pressing just to come up with some broad vision of what it might or could be because of the potential for accessing Brownsfield funding. Is that correct, Chris?
Yeah, that's correct. And I'll apologize. My kids are getting a little bit active, so apologize. They're running back and forth in the background a little bit here. Yeah, for the city-owned property, that's exactly right. Looking to apply for a grant, looking for that might be. Again, this ties in because one of the options here, option 2 for this lot, again on page 92, option 2 was for kind of a public plaza, there's a service type area, which, you know, maybe that fulfills the need, maybe it doesn't. Maybe it's wrong to group this in with the other 3. Maybe the other 3 is kind of the larger, more public gathering space, and then this is kind of a side spin from that or an additional project from there. But you know, we've had a lot of kind of mixed conversations about this, but I do think it'd be helpful to get council's guidance here. I've heard we need to go out to the community on this. Again, I think for every person you asked what they want to do with the site, we could get a different answer. So I'm a little hesitant to, you know, just ask the people generally, what would you like to do with the site? I just think we'll get a lot of answers. So if the council wants to give me some direction to narrow this down a little bit and how to proceed, that's what I'm looking for tonight.
Great, thank you. So I think I've mentioned this. I personally like the idea of the mixed use. I like the idea of having a gathering space here, but I also like the idea of increasing available commercial spaces in the downtown area. It's just something that we don't have a lot of and something that we could use more of. So I'd like the idea of combining both those things to make a functional place for us to gather, and it could have a bathroom really easily. We could put any infrastructure that we want. I like the idea of food trucks being able to show up, farmers market being able to use the space, the new mud oven pizza. You know, I think there's a lot of opportunity here, and it all really excites me. So, and the city owns it, so that's a big positive. I think the fact that this one might have a little bit higher cost, I think, unless we just pave it. But putting a building on would cost a little more. So I'll leave it at that. Councilor Nielsen?
Yeah, I do. I agree. I think one of our focuses, if we're going to go forward with what I think, the public restroom is just really high priority for me, and parking is high priority. Another one I love there, I really like the idea of pavers instead of just having it, setting it aside, letting it be more ornate and just rather than just a parking lot. And I also think that farmers market, food carts, and some public seating, whether that be benches or tables or a covered area where people, because if we do welcome or encourage carts, or it would be nice to have a seating gathering area and sit, and more possible if it is a 2-story structure, maybe we could do some kind of business of a rental or whatever it may be, a business above the public restroom or public use area. So, and then is it true that we might be able to address even that parking area that Pioneer has to kind of do a weekend? Could we possibly kind of work with you on that? If you're not the parking area that partners up to our lot, maybe in conjunction on the time that it's not being used, that we could use that as well if we were to come into some kind of agreement with Pioneer. And that would also add additional parking area for our citizens and visitors.
Chris, has there been any conversations with Pioneer about using their parking when they're not there?
No, I'd be happy to do that if that's the direction the council wanted to go, but no, it's been too preliminary for me to really reach out to them on that. I'm sure that they've seen this and looked at this and read through it, but no, I've not had any conversations with them.
Thank you.
I don't think it's out of reason, but we'd need to come up with some type of formal agreement, talk about insurance, liability, coverage, all that kind of stuff. But yeah, I don't know how susceptible or I don't know how much they'd want to entertain that discussion or not. I think they would, but I don't know.
Thank you.
Chris, it is a conversation we could have, is it not?
Councilor.
Yes. Yes.
So I'm curious, Chris, I didn't see it in here, the square footage of that piece of property. Do you happen to know that? It's not overly vague, is why I ask. If you're able to come up with that, that would be great just in this conversation. But I'm wondering with respect to the Bronzefield grant, if we can't look at, no matter what we do, we have to fix the issues underground. I think it's premature to be looking at a building and a space of which everything around it is changing, right? The downtown streetscape is changing. We're talking about some of these other projects. And I'd hate to prematurely look at a structure, both cost-wise and design-wise, before we really know how these other things are going to play out a little bit. And wondering, so to Councillor Nielsen's point and some of the community involvement we've heard as well, is this too, the 13th Street will be that gateway, if you will, that you'll see on the way by. And certainly there's enough traffic going, pedestrian traffic occurring there. But this particular lot has the opportunity to be a diagonal facing gateway to an open space. It could be markets, it could be food carts, it could be all the things we've talked about, those benches and that extra space. And again, what comes to mind is sip and stroll, right? You've got all of those folks running right there where this could have been kind of an avenue or a venue where people could rest. There's not a lot of place for that in this event, for example. But couldn't we draft that up with the idea of, just knowing what public restrooms can be like when you're inside of a building, I would propose that we look at kind of that outdoor access for more than just one or two stalls, for example, especially as we see event numbers increase. Can we draft up a proposal that this is how we'd like to use this? We're looking at paving it for these purposes. We'd like to, put in some sort of restroom facilities to serve the community, some landscape elements, to tie in with our downtown streetscapes. Wouldn't that suffice for that grant purpose without overcommitting at this point?
Yeah, I think any direction the council wants to give on the future use of this property is going to help with the grant. I don't know they're going to be overly picky, but I don't know it's something that I want to say we're going to do this, just kidding, a year from now and change direction. So I do think we want some direction. I agree with your sentiment on, place to gather. I think the mixed use that the mayor talked about and that's defined here, the option 1 allows for that. And maybe it's different perspective. I mean, your vision of, hitting Philomath downtown and having an open plaza, I think the same opportunity arrives for somebody hits the downtown and they see a nice new building there that's got nice commercial frontage and it's got the area back behind kind of as it's drawn here. I think that's a great opportunity for the city as well to really welcome people into the downtown with a nice commercial building as opposed to a downtown plaza area. So maybe that's just how we look at it differently. But you're right, it is a big opportunity as you enter the downtown on 14th Street to make a statement on welcoming people to the downtown. So I totally agree with you there. It's a matter of what is that statement we want to make. Is it open plaza and food carts and festivals, events, or is it commercial buildings with retail frontage, public restroom availability, visitor center, that type of thing. I will just add one of the initial conversations that, some of the preliminary conversations we've had on this would be, the city's not in the real estate business. We're not in the business of commercial investing or even commercial land investing. We acquired this property with the notion that it was going to provide some type of additional off-street parking. That was the premise and why the city council, or actually the urban renewal agency, agreed with the purchase of this property, was a recognition that as more businesses come to the downtown, we were going to have additional need for off-street parking in the downtown area. And so that was the whole premise for purchasing this lot in the first place. Secondarily, that it was a polluted property that we knew was going to take a heavy hand to get cleaned up. And that in 20 years that it had been there, we hadn't seen private development want to take on that burden. And so it seemed like an opportunity for the city to be able to step in and help get this property cleaned up and get it utilized. So all that said, I think my interest in this property would still hold on having some off-street parking, as was the original idea. If there was a commercial building on here, that's not something that the city would build. We would enter into some type of a public-private partnership, and we would allow for a fee or an ongoing lease amount or whatever. We would look to the private sector to develop a building there and own that building there, in some type of an agreement there. It wouldn't be the city that would actually build, take on the building of that and leasing it out for rent or anything like that. It would be leasing the land to a developer that would then develop the building and rent out that commercial space and oversee that. With that, there could be provisions about, one of the units, say, is for our visitor center and a public restroom, right? That could be built into that agreement, whatever that was, as just an example. Parking restrictions or regulations would be added to that agreement. So there's a lot of wiggle room that the city has in those public-private partnerships, and we'd want to make sure it was benefiting both entities, and obviously not just the private entity, but we'd want to make sure that we were getting some public benefit out of that. So all that to say, I think there's a lot of possibilities there still. But again, happy to hear what other council members have to say as well.
Thank you. Councilor Andrade?
Based on all of the webinars and the information that I've read on regarding parking, it's actually a fascinating topic, which I had no idea until I did. And based on everything that I saw, a lot of the issue with parking in most places has to do with strategic parking. And from what I understand with our Eco Northwest documents, we have sufficient parking. It's not necessarily adequate because it's not in the right spaces or for the correct or formatted correctly, or for the the fact that we don't really have RV parking or trailer parking or whatever that is, with good enough signage and everything. From what I understand, one of the things on our work session topics here is a potential downtown parking study. And I don't think, like I said, based on what I know, I don't think adding parking to this lot here that the city owns would be ideal in any sense of the matter, especially considering the fact that it is a fairly small lot from what I understand. And I don't know, based on everything that I have heard from other people at farmers markets in particular, and where you get more than just the people so therefore less of an echo chamber, because you're meeting new people. The main thing that we heard was, we want a town square, we want a gathering space. And I like what Councilor Bisco said about having an outdoor facing, public restrooms. If it's not advertised that there are public restrooms inside of a visitor's, I don't know. I feel like we could easily have this plaza space that allows we could have the stalls there similar to at Common Fields, where there are, people don't have to bring their tents for farmers markets or anything like that. They can just bring their wares there, or for food trucks, or we don't even have to provide those stalls. We can just have people bring their things to sell. And I don't know. I would like us to focus on this as being just an open plaza for now. And maybe we end up developing more on it. As you've said before, there's going to be a lot of cleanup. And it's going to be a long project, obviously. And I think while that cleanup is happening, and while we do something like Councilor Bisco suggested with the outline of, we want this to be this outdoor space with bathrooms and landscape elements and, allow for food trucks and farmers markets to happen, then we can potentially come up with additional ideas like the outdoor amphitheater that has been proposed a couple times, or maybe then there will be interest for a building of some sorts or a visitor's center. But that can come with time, as long as we just have that base layout of a space to do things outside with the community.
Thank you. Councillor Kazi?
I think this would be an ideal opportunity for public input, because I can see this space as one of two general options in an open plaza area. And I think there was originally a vision of a clock tower that would serve as a focal point as you came into town. And the other alternative being the mixed use and the building, which could have a clock tower too. And in my opinion, I think it would be nice to get the Chamber of Commerce out of the corner and put them in the visitors space. But I think that's the kind of decision that it would be great to have the public's input on, because it's not one that I don't think the seven of us should necessarily think one way or the other.
Thank you. And I'm just gonna mark the time. We got 3 minutes to have this conversation, finish this up, and then to have a conversation about parking before we give ourselves 5 minutes for the council meeting. So, Councilor Biscombe.
So this is the first time I've heard mention of this being a private-public partnership between the builder and the city owning the property. I'm curious about what that might look like. Like a builder could build in any number of our open commercial spaces. What's the risk of an arrangement like that down the road if things don't go well? And that happens certainly in business. So if we relinquish that building and things don't go well, what does that mean for the city? What are those potential risks?
Chris, you're muted.
Yeah, all that's to be determined, Councilor Bisco. I mean, we've not even started down this road yet. So the whole thought was that the city isn't going to take on the role as being the developer building a commercial / retail building and leasing it out. I mean, that's not what I see as the city's role in this at all. I think providing a space, providing land, and providing, the desire to have an agreement with a private developer, I think is the furthest that I would feel comfortable with the city going forward in some type of an endeavor like this.
Thank you.
And besides the water tower, the clock tower, wasn't it also mentioned a water feature or something like that? In one of the meetings, they mentioned that the town center could have like a water feature, something to gather, and I remember that being part of the discussion as well. It's not just a clock tower.
And I think we got some real negative feedback about anything to do with water.
Yeah, we do.
So I think you have some good feedback from the council on that, Chris. Now maybe we could transition to this parking study for 5 minutes and just have a conversation about that real quick.
Yeah. So I reached out to, let me just preface it. I reached out to 2 different consultants that have done downtown parking studies for other communities. Talked about where we were at, the plans that we had done. Looking, cost wise, they're looking in the $20,000 to $30,000 range, depending on how in depth we want them to be, how much public input we want to have, how many public meetings we want them to attend. So ballpark $20,000 to $30,000 based on how much engagement we want them to have with everybody versus relying on their own expertise and experience. As they started going through questions, I think some of the similar questions that I had at the last meeting, a lot of it circles around allowed uses and zoning, what types of uses are going to be in some of these areas. Talked about the potential of rezoning some properties and expanding the downtown area. And there was some concerns about whether we would incorporate those potential future changes into this design study, or we would do the study as it is today. So some uncertainty there. We'd have to make some decisions and some calls on, do we have them preliminarily go ahead and do the study as if the downtown is going to be expanded, even though we've not even really started looking at that yet? Or do we wait on a parking study until that's actually done in place and then move forward? Did talk a lot with them about, both individuals, about parking of like larger rigs and RVs and tourists and stuff. And both of them, without even really going a lot of detail, I said, you're focused for larger vehicles to get them out of your downtown to a convenient place to park, but you're not going to provide downtown parks. We're not going to recommend you provide a place in your downtown corridor for RVs and large trucks to park. You're going to look for signage and wayfinding to get them off of your main street. And maybe you're a block or 2 or 3 blocks off of Main Street and having a place large enough for them to pull and park, and then convenient enough for them to be able to walk or, access those downtown amenities. But that downtown core is supposed to be pedestrian centric, pedestrian friendly, and you're not going to really encourage those larger vehicles to be having a place there. It's, getting that out of the area. So I just mentioned that because, we've talked about having RVs off the side of the road and everything else. And that both consultants I talked to just said, yeah, you're going to look at wayfinding and directing them to other locations. So all that said, they're not overly busy right now. Both I talked to, there is a TGM, a total growth management grant that we can utilize that will often pay for downtown parking studies. They're fairly competitive, although it's more on the timing of it. And I apologize, I don't remember off the top of my head the date on that one. I recall it was fall or winter. It's not like right now we'd have to apply. So we've got some time to decide on how we want to proceed or not. We didn't budget for anything like that for this year. So it may be something that we look at a little bit closer, and maybe we put it in the budget for next year and proceed at that time. But that's kind of what I found out, and I'm just reporting that back. So are there any other specific questions or more general questions that I can answer about the parking study and how that could benefit us?
Thank you very much for that, Chris. Appreciate the background. Councilor Andrade?
Yeah, no, I don't think we were, if it sounded like myself or anyone else was proposing that there be downtown parking for RVs, I don't think that was the intent. It wasn't for me. It was very much let's make sure that it's clear where that is so that there isn't an issue safety wise, or just preventing many other vehicles from being able to park in those areas. But also I think you're correct. I think the TGM grant is around the fall. So you had said that the range was $20,000 to $30,000 depending on engagement and such, and other questions that they had. But was that not just an inventory then? Because from what I remember, I thought we wanted more of like a baseline inventory kind of a study, unless I'm misremembering.
Sorry, I hit my mute. Yeah, I mean, if we're just looking at baseline inventory, I can have our GIS employee do that. I mean, I can have Steve give us a total area of public parking we have and just run those numbers. My impression was that the council was talking more about a study as in what you have now, where future parking could and should go, where you could expand parking, and a full-on study is what I got.
I don't know. I might have misunderstood completely, but I guess I still think of those things as being part of that, I guess, basic inventory, and then just the potentials there. I don't, I guess maybe I'm just conflating it with a traffic study. that very well could be it.
So we're gonna cut ourselves off so that we can just have 5 minutes break on this, but I appreciate the information, Chris. With that, we're going to adjourn the work session and come back at 7 o'clock.
Sometimes I just need to stretch.
Yeah.
Hey, Matt, we just just finished up the work session, and we'll just be starting here at 7, but everybody's probably hitting the